She woke up with a heavy diamond weighing down her ring finger, and no memory of who she had married. 72 hours earlier, Elena Mercer had been just a waitress counting tip money to pay her rent. Now she lay on silk sheets, inside a fortress guarded by armed men, with a new identity. The wife of the most feared Mafia boss in New York. Her only crime? Taking a bullet for a child she didn't even know. But in the underworld, kindness is never free, and the wedding ring is not a promise of love, it is a death sentence. The neon sign of Joe's all-night diner buzzed with its familiar dying hum, flickering against the relentless November rain. Water streaked down the grimy windows like tears the city refused to wipe away. Elena Mercer wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. Her movements were mechanical, rehearsed, the muscle memory of 5 years carved into her bones. 1,847 nights. She had counted, every single one. The clock on the wall read 2:14 in the morning. The diner smelled of burnt coffee, stale grease, and the sharp tang of pine-scented cleaner that never quite masked the despair underneath. 3 customers remained scattered across the worn vinyl booths, a drunk mumbling to his reflection in the window, a trucker inhaling his 4th cup of coffee, and Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker who came every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. Elena pulled out her tip jar and counted the crumpled bills and scattered coins. $23.17. Her stomach tightened. Her mother's medication cost $67. Due tomorrow. No extensions. No exceptions. The pharmacy had made that abundantly clear last month when Elena had begged for 3 extra days. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Lily, her 19-year-old sister. The one good thing Elena had managed to protect from the wreckage of their family. She pulled out the phone, keeping it hidden below the counter. "Hey sis, I know it's late, but the bookstore said my textbooks are ready. It's $234 for the semester. I can try to find a used copy online, but Elena stopped reading. $234, plus $67 for medication, plus rent due in 6 days, plus the $400 she still owed to the men who had visited last Tuesday." She looked down at her wrist, where a bruise the color of rotting plums bloomed beneath her sleeve. The men hadn't been gentle when they'd reminded her about the debt, her father's debt, $47,000 borrowed from people who charged interest in blood. 16 years ago, Richard Mercer had kissed his daughters goodnight, promised to bring back ice cream, and never returned. He left behind a gambling addiction's worth of IOUs, a wife who would later develop stage 3 breast cancer, and 2 girls who learned very quickly that the world owed them nothing. Elena had been 12, old enough to understand, young enough to still hope he might come back. He never did. Now, at 28, Elena worked 2 jobs nights at Joe's, days as a nursing assistant at a retirement home. She slept 4 hours when she was lucky, 3 when she wasn't. Her back ached constantly. Her hands were calloused and cracked. The dark circles under her eyes had become as permanent as her father's absence. "Hey, sweetheart, top me off?" Mr. Henderson held up his empty cup, his smile revealing coffee-stained teeth. Elena forced her lips to curve upward. "Coming right up, Earl." She poured the black coffee with practiced precision. When she finished, Henderson fumbled in his pocket and produced 2 quarters, sliding them across the counter with the pride of a man presenting diamonds. 50 cents. "Thank you so much," Elena said, and she meant it. Because 50 cents was 50 cents, and every cent counted when you were drowning. Henderson nodded, satisfied, and returned to his newspaper. Elena tucked the coins into her apron and caught her reflection in the chrome coffee pot. A ghost stared back. Hollow cheeks, dull eyes. 28 years old and already running on fumes. "I'm not strong," she thought, pressing her palm against the cool counter. "I just don't have a choice." That was the truth people never understood. Survival wasn't about courage. It was about having no alternative. You kept moving because stopping meant dying, and dying meant leaving Lily alone, leaving her mother without medication, leaving debts that would follow her family like a curse. So Elena moved. Every night, 1,847 times. The bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up automatically, expecting another drunk stumbling in from the rain. It wasn't a drunk. A boy stood in the doorway. Small, alone, couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto the cracked linoleum floor. Elena's hand froze mid-wipe. 2 o'clock in the morning. A child. Alone. Something cold slithered down her spine. The boy didn't move like someone who was lost. He moved like someone who was hunted. Elena set down her rag, her eyes scanning him with the quick assessment that 5 years of nursing assistant work had drilled into her instincts. No visible injuries. No limping. But the way he held himself, shoulders curved inward, spine rigid, eyes darting, that was the posture of prey. His clothes told one story, a navy cashmere coat that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, polished Oxford shoes, miniature and gleaming despite the rain, a wool scarf wrapped carefully around his neck, the kind sold in boutiques that didn't bother displaying prices. But his face told another, red-rimmed eyes, trembling lower lip, skin pale as milk beneath the diner's harsh fluorescent lights, and clutched against his chest, incongruous against all that expensive fabric, was a teddy bear. Old, worn, one button eye missing, its fur matted from years of desperate hugging, the clothes of a prince, the eyes of a victim. Elena's chest tightened. "Hey there, sweetie." She kept her voice soft, the same tone she used with frightened patients at the nursing home. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer. He scrambled onto a stool at the far end of the counter, pressing himself into the corner where the wall met the display case, making himself small, invisible. His knuckles were white around the teddy bear. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was looking at the door. The cold feeling in Elena's spine spread to her stomach. She knew that look, knew it intimately. She had worn that exact expression 3 years ago, when she'd finally gathered enough courage to flee Marcus's apartment at 3 a.m, the way her eyes had kept darting to shadows, the way every sound had made her flinch, the way her body had screamed, "Run, run, run," even when her legs could barely move. This child wasn't lost. He was running from someone. Elena glanced at the other customers. Henderson was absorbed in his newspaper. The trucker had his face buried in his phone. The drunk was passed out, drool pooling on the table. No help there. She could call the police. But this was Queens, and it was 2 a.m. Response time averaged 45 minutes on a good night. On a rainy Tuesday in November, she'd be lucky to see a patrol car before dawn. Elena made a decision. She grabbed a glass and filled it with warm milk, then slowly approached the boy. Not too fast. No sudden movements. The way you'd approach a wounded animal. "I'm Elena," she said, sliding the milk toward him. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. But you're safe here, okay? I won't let anyone hurt you." The boy's eyes flickered to her face for just a moment. Dark eyes, intelligent and terrified. Something in them cracked, just slightly. His lips parted, and then the door exploded inward. Elena spun around. 2 men filled the doorway, rain dripping from leather jackets that strained against massive shoulders. One had a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, turning his face into a permanent sneer. The other was bald, his scalp gleaming, his neck thick as a tree trunk. They smelled of cigarettes and wet leather, and tucked into Scar's waistband, barely concealed, was the cold glint of blued steel. The boy behind her whimpered. It was a sound so small, so filled with pure terror, that something ancient and protective roared to life in Elena's chest. "There he is." Scar's voice was flat, emotionless, like a man commenting on the weather. The Corsetti kid. Corsetti. Even Elena, who kept her head down and her world small, knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. It was whispered in back alleys and printed in tabloid headlines. The family that ruled the shadows. The empire built on blood. The bald one, Razor. Her mind labeled him, reached into his jacket. Time fractured. Everything happened at once and in slow motion simultaneously. Henderson's coffee mug shattered against the floor as he dove beneath his table. The kitchen door slammed Joe, the cook disappearing without a backward glance. The drunk finally stirred, saw the guns, and went rigid with the paralysis of the deeply intoxicated. Only Elena stood still, not because she was brave. God, no. She had never been brave a day in her life. She stood still because 5 years of exhaustion had burned away her survival instincts, leaving nothing but a hollow numbness where fear should live. She turned her head. Marco had his eyes squeezed shut, his small arms wrapped around the teddy bear so tightly the worn fabric stretched. His lips moved in silent prayer or desperate plea. Elena couldn't tell which. And suddenly she wasn't in Joe's diner anymore. She was in a cramped apartment in the Bronx, 16 years ago. Lily was 7, clutching her own teddy bear, asking why Daddy hadn't come home. Elena had wrapped her arms around her sister and lied, said everything would be okay, said Daddy was just working late. The lies hadn't protected Lily from the debt collectors, from the eviction notices, from watching their mother wither under the weight of illness and abandonment. But Elena had tried. She had always tried, not this child. The thought cut through the numbness like a blade. Not another child. Razor's gun cleared his jacket. The barrel swung toward Marco. Elena moved. She didn't think about her aching back or her exhausted muscles or the $47,000 she owed. She didn't think about the medication she couldn't afford or the textbooks she couldn't buy. She vaulted over the counter, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, her voice tearing from her throat. "Get down!" The gun cracked. The first bullet hit her left shoulder. It felt like being punched by God, a white-hot explosion of pain that should have dropped her instantly. But momentum carried her forward, her body operating on something beyond adrenaline, beyond instinct. She collided with Marco, her arms wrapping around his small frame, dragging him off the stool. Bang, bang. The second bullet grazed her hip, leaving a trail of fire. The third buried itself in her thigh. Her leg buckled, but she was already falling, twisting her body to take the impact, to keep the boy protected beneath her. They hit the floor hard. Elena curled around Marco like a human shell, her blood warm and wet soaked into his expensive cashmere coat. The pain was everywhere now, a symphony of agony playing in 3 different keys. "Don't look," she gasped, pressing his face into her chest. Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Keep your eyes closed. I'm here. I'm right here." Marco sobbed against her, his tears mixing with her blood. More gunfire erupted, but this was different. Heavier, controlled, 3 precise shots, spaced evenly, the sound of someone who killed with the efficiency of breathing. 2 bodies hit the floor, then footsteps. Fast, expensive leather soles against cheap linoleum. "Marco." The voice was deep, raw with a terror that Elena recognized, the terror of a parent. She had heard that same sound in her mother's voice when Lily had gotten lost at the county fair, when Elena had come home with bruises from Marcus. She tried to lift her head. A man dropped to his knees beside them. She caught fragments, charcoal 3-piece suit, shoulders broad enough to block the light, the sharp scent of sandalwood, cologne, and fresh gunpowder. "She's hit." The deep voice again, but closer now. A command wrapped in barely controlled panic. "Get the car. Now." Large hands touched her. Gentle, impossibly gentle for hands that had just killed 2 men. "I've got you." Elena looked up. Dark eyes met hers. Eyes like black coffee, like winter midnight, like something dangerous wearing a human mask. She tried to speak, to ask about the boy, to understand what was happening, but the darkness was faster. It swallowed her whole. Waking was not a single moment, but a slow emergence, like swimming upward through honey. The first thing Elena noticed was the absence of pain. Her body floated in a warm, weightless haze, the unmistakable embrace of hospital-grade narcotics, the kind she had administered to dying patients at the nursing home, the kind that cost more per dose than her weekly paycheck. The second thing was the smell. Not antiseptic and industrial cleaner. Not the familiar staleness of Joe's diner or the mildew of her apartment. Lilies. Fresh lilies. And beneath that, something clean and expensive. The scent of fabric softener that had never seen a laundromat. Elena opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was painted. Not white. Not the water-stained popcorn texture of her shoebox apartment. This ceiling bore a fresco, angels and clouds rendered in Renaissance detail. Gold leaf catching the soft light. She blinked. Blinked again. The room was enormous. Mahogany wainscoting climbed the walls. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, its mantel carved from white marble. Heavy velvet curtains framed windows that stretched nearly floor to ceiling. The space was easily the size of her entire apartment, maybe bigger. Medical equipment surrounded her bed, but not the kind she recognized from county hospitals. This machinery was sleek, modern, silent. No rhythmic beeping, no flickering displays, just quiet efficiency. Like everything here had been designed to heal without disturbing. Elena turned her head toward the window. Gardens, manicured hedges, a stone fountain spraying water into the gray morning air, and beyond the fountain, men in dark suits walking the perimeter. Men with guns. Panic slammed into her chest. "Mom," the word came out as a croak. "Lily, what time is it? How long?" She tried to sit up. Her left shoulder screamed in protest, the medication not quite strong enough to mask the movement. She gasped, falling back against pillows that felt like clouds. The IV line tugged at her right hand. She grabbed it, ready to rip it free, and froze. Something was on her finger, heavy, cold, unfamiliar. Elena lifted her hand. There, resting on her ring finger as if it had always belonged, was a diamond. Not just any diamond. This was a stone the size of her thumbnail, emerald cut, flanked by smaller baguettes, all set in platinum so polished it reflected her stunned face back at her. "What the hell?" Her voice echoed in the vast room. Elena's nursing instincts kicked in despite her confusion. She forced herself to assess. Left shoulder bandaged, professionally wrapped, no bleeding through. Right hip gauze and tape, clean dressing. Left thigh the same. Whoever had treated her knew what they were doing. This wasn't emergency room patchwork. This was private care, expensive care. She looked around again, her heart hammering against her ribs. No call button, no nurse's station visible through the door, no hospital identification bracelet on her wrist, just that impossible ring, glittering obscenely in the firelight. This wasn't a hospital. The realization crept over her like ice water. The armed guards, the locked windows she could see, the security latches from here, the fresco ceiling and silk sheets and fresh lilies that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. This was a cage. A beautiful, gilded, inescapable cage. But whose? And why? The door across the room clicked. Elena's breath caught in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows near the fireplace. She hadn't even noticed him there, sitting motionless in a wingback chair like a predator waiting for his prey to wake. He stepped into the light, and Elena understood, with sudden, terrifying clarity, that her old life was over. He was tall. That was the first thing Elena's overwhelmed mind registered. Tall and broad-shouldered, filling the space between fireplace and bed like a wall made flesh. The second thing she noticed was how he moved, unhurried, deliberate, each step placed with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit, but the jacket hung open and his collar was unbuttoned, missing a tie, casual, almost relaxed. Yet somehow that carelessness made him more dangerous, not less like a wolf lounging before the hunt. His hair was dark, nearly black, with threads of silver at the temples that spoke of age and authority. Mid-30s, Elena guessed. Maybe 36. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, shadowed with stubble that suggested he hadn't slept properly in days. And his eyes. God, his eyes. They were the color of black coffee, of coal, of something that had burned so long it had forgotten what light looked like. A faded scar traced from the corner of his right eye down to his jaw, thin, old, almost elegant in its violence. He was beautiful. Beautiful the way a tiger was beautiful, the way a storm was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made your hindbrain scream danger even as your eyes refused to look away. He stopped at the foot of her bed. His gaze swept over her clinical, assessing before settling on her face. "You've been asleep for 4 days, Mrs. Corsetti." His voice was deep, smooth, carrying a faint accent she couldn't place. Elena's brain short-circuited. "I'm not," she choked on the words. Tried again. "I'm not Mrs. Anything. Who the hell are you? Where am I?" Why is there a she thrust her hand toward him, the diamond catching the light? Why is this on my finger? The man didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply watched her with those endless dark eyes, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. "My name is Dominic Corsetti." He said it like she should know, like the name itself was an answer. "You are in my home, the Hamptons, Corsetti, the boy in the diner, the Corsetti kid," the scarred man had said. Elena's blood turned to ice. "The Mafia." The word fell from her lips like a stone. "You're the Mafia." Dominic's expression didn't change. "Among other things, I need to leave." Elena struggled to sit up, ignoring the screaming protest of her wounds. "My mother, she has appointments, her medication, and my sister. She needs Margaret Mercer." Dominic cut her off. His voice remained level, almost gentle. Stage 3 breast cancer. Previously receiving treatment at Queen's General with a 63% survival rate. He paused. She was transferred 2 days ago to Memorial Sloan Kettering. Private room, the best oncologist in the country. Her survival odds have improved to 87%. Elena stopped breathing. "Your sister, Lily, 19 years old, sophomore at NYU, studying pre-law. Her tuition has been paid in full through graduation. Her textbooks have been delivered." The room tilted. "And the $47,000 you owed to Vincent Rizzo's collection agency?" Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That debt no longer exists. Neither does Rizzo's agency. They've been dissolved." Elena's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. "What did you do to my family?" "I saved them." Dominic's eyes finally softened, just a fraction. "The same way you saved my son, Marco. The little boy with the teddy bear. The terrified eyes." Elena remembered the weight of him in her arms, the heat of bullets tearing through her body. "Is he Marco is alive, unharmed, because of you?" Dominic stepped closer, his shadow falling across the bed. "He is my only heir. The Moreno family has been trying to eliminate him for 2 years. You threw yourself in front of their bullets without hesitation." Elena shook her head. You were photographed being carried into my car, into my home." Dominic's voice hardened. "The entire underworld now knows your face. The Morenos will not forgive what you cost them. If you walk out those gates, you'll be dead within 72 hours. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Elena stared at him, this beautiful, terrifying stranger who held her family's fate in his hands. What do you want from me? Dominic met her gaze without wavering. You have two choices. Listen to what I'm offering, or walk through those gates and die. Elena's mind raced through 1,000 responses, none of them adequate. I don't understand. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Why marriage? Why me? I'm nobody. I'm a waitress who can't even afford her mother's medication. Dominic moved to the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he simply stared out at the manicured gardens below. My wife's name was Isabella. The words came slowly, carefully, like he was handling broken glass. She died 7 years ago. Complications during childbirth. Marco survived. She didn't. Elena watched his reflection in the window. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. Since then, I've raised my son alone. The business, my family's business, requires stability. A leader with a family appears stronger, more grounded, less vulnerable to challenges. He turned to face her. The night you saved Marco, paparazzi captured images of you being carried into my car. Unconscious, bleeding, wrapped in my coat. His lips pressed into a thin line. By morning, every tabloid in New York was running the story. Mystery woman, secret lover, the Corsetti scandal. Elena's stomach dropped. I was dying. The media doesn't care about context. They care about narrative. Dominic crossed his arms. The rumors are already spreading. If I deny the relationship, the Morenos will know you're unprotected. They'll come for you. If I confirm it but don't legitimize it, you become a target of a different kind, opportunists, blackmailers, enemies looking for leverage. So your solution is marriage? A contract marriage. Dominic's voice remained steady. 1 year, public appearances as husband and wife, private lives separate. At the end of the term, we divorce quietly, you receive compensation, and you disappear into whatever life you choose with full protection until the Moreno threat is neutralized. Elena laughed. It sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. You're insane. I'm practical. Dominic reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather folder. He placed it on the bed beside her. These are the terms. Elena didn't touch it. Tell me. If you agree, you receive the following. He ticked off each item like a business proposal. Your family's debt, the $47,000, is already erased. That is a gift, regardless of your decision. Your mother's medical care at Memorial Sloan Kettering continues indefinitely, paid in full. Your sister's education through graduation, tuition, housing, books, all expenses covered. 24-hour security for both of them. Elena's throat tightened. She thought of her mother in that private hospital room, of Lily studying without the weight of loans crushing her future. And for you personally, Dominic continued, $500,000 upon completion of the contract, deposited into an account of your choosing. Enough to start over anywhere in the world. $500,000. Elena had never seen that many zeros outside of lottery advertisements. What do I have to do? Live here, attend public events as my wife, maintain the appearance of a marriage. Dominic paused, and something shifted in his expression, something almost human. There will be no physical requirements. You will have your own bedroom, your own space. I will not touch you without your explicit consent. That is non-negotiable. Elena searched his face for the lie, for the catch, for the monster hiding beneath the businessman's mask. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for a stranger? Because you threw yourself in front of bullets for a child you didn't know. Dominic's voice softened, just barely. Because my son is alive because of you, and because, in my world, debts are always repaid. Elena looked down at the leather folder, at the diamond ring still glittering on her finger. I'm not selling myself. You're not selling yourself. Dominic met her eyes. You're surviving, the way you've survived your entire life, the way you survived your father's abandonment, your mother's illness, the men who left bruises on your wrist. Elena flinched. He knew about that too. I'm offering you a way out, Elena. 1 year of performance in exchange for a lifetime of freedom. He stepped back toward the door. You have 24 hours to decide. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Elena stared at the folder, her heart pounding against her damaged ribs. 24 hours to sell her soul to the devil, or 24 hours to sign her own death warrant. They gave her a phone. Untraceable, they said. Secure. Elena's fingers trembled as she dialed Lily's number. It rang twice before her sister's voice burst through the speaker, bright and breathless, and so achingly normal that Elena's chest ached. Elena, oh my God, where have you been? I've been calling and calling. And then this morning someone from the bursar's office called and said Lily paused to breathe. They said my tuition is paid, all of it, through graduation. And my books arrived at my dorm with a note that said, from a friend. What is going on? Elena closed her eyes. It's complicated, Lily. I'll explain everything soon. Are you okay? Am I okay? Elena, someone just paid $40,000 for my education. I'm more than okay. I'm freaking out. A pause. Are you in trouble? No. The lie came easily. 5 years of practice. I met someone who wanted to help. She could hear Lily's skepticism through the phone, but her sister, bless her, didn't push. Okay. But you'll tell me everything when you're ready? I promise. The second call was to Memorial Sloan Kettering. Mrs. Mercer is responding excellently to the new treatment protocol, the nurse informed her. Dr. Ashworth is very optimistic. She's been moved to a private suite with round-the-clock care. Are you family? Her daughter? Wonderful. She's been asking for you. She's confused about how she got here, but she seems happy, hopeful. Elena couldn't remember the last time anyone had used that word in connection with her mother. The third call was to her old landlord in Queens. Mercer? The man's gruff voice softened with surprise. Someone came by yesterday. Paid off everything you owed, plus 6 months advance. Said you'd be relocating. You finally catch a break or something? Or something. Elena ended the call and stared at her hands. Calloused. Cracked. The hands of a woman who had scrubbed dishes and changed bedpans and counted pennies until her eyes blurred. For the first time in 5 years, those hands had nothing to calculate. No mental arithmetic of survival. No desperate juggling of which bill to ignore this month. It felt like standing on solid ground after years of drowning. She thought about her choices. Refuse the contract. Walk out those gates. Die within 72 hours, according to Dominic. Her mother would lose her treatment. Lily would lose her education. Everything Elena had sacrificed for would crumble into nothing. Except the contract. 1 year of pretending. 1 year in a gilded cage with a man who terrified her. And then freedom. Real freedom. With $500,000 and a future she could actually choose. I've survived 28 years by doing things I hate. The thought crystallized in her mind, hard and cold and true. What's 1 more year? When Dominic returned that evening, Elena was sitting up in bed. The leather folder lay open on her lap. I want to read every page, she said, out loud, with your lawyer present. Something flickered in Dominic's dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect, of course. The contract was 47 pages long. A gray-haired lawyer in a 3-piece suit read each clause in a droning monotone. Elena listened to every word, every subclause, every carefully constructed loophole. She wasn't stupid. She had learned long ago that the devil lived in the details. When the lawyer finished, Elena picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name Elena Mercer, soon to be Elena Corsetti, in neat, precise letters. Dominic took the folder. His fingers brushed hers, brief and electric. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Corsetti. Elena looked down at the diamond ring, still heavy on her finger. It caught the firelight, scattering rainbows across the silk sheets. This isn't family, she said quietly. This is a prison. Dominic's expression didn't change. Perhaps, he replied, but it's a prison that will keep you alive. 2 days passed in a haze of silk sheets and prescribed painkillers. Elena spent most of that time staring at the ceiling, watching the painted angels and wondering if they were laughing at her. The contract sat in a drawer beside her bed, signed, sealed, inescapable. On the third morning, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned her head toward the door, expecting a nurse or one of the silent staff members who delivered her meals. Instead, she found a small figure hovering at the threshold. Marco. He looked different in daylight, clean, fed, wearing a crisp white shirt and navy pants that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. But his posture was the same, shoulders hunched, body angled toward escape, one arm wrapped around that battered teddy bear like a lifeline. Hi. Elena pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing slightly. You can come in, you know. I don't bite. Marco hesitated. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, studied her face with an intensity that seemed too old for 7 years. Does it? His voice was barely above a whisper. Does it hurt? Elena considered lying. Considered the polite fiction adults always told children. Instead, she smiled. Not as much as the first time I ate wasabi. Marco blinked. Confusion flickered across his features, followed by something that wasn't quite a smile but wanted to be. He stepped into the room, one small step, then another. You saved me. The words tumbled out, rushed and uncertain. In the diner, Papa said you jumped in front of the bullets. That makes you a hero, right? Elena's chest tightened. I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing kids get bullied. Marco considered this. His fingers tightened on the teddy bear's worn paw. My mom used to say that too. The words hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Elena felt the weight of them settle in her chest. This child had lost his mother before he could even remember her face, had grown up surrounded by guards and guns and the constant threat of violence. And somehow, despite all of it, he still had soft eyes and a battered teddy bear and a heart that remembered his mother's words. Tell me about her, Elena said gently. Your mom. Marco looked up, surprised. People probably didn't ask him that. People probably avoided the subject, tiptoeing around the ghost of Isabella Corsetti like she was a wound too painful to touch. She liked lilies. Marco moved closer, settling on the edge of Elena's bed. Papa puts them in every room because of her. And she liked to sing. Not real songs, just made-up ones, silly ones. A tiny smile ghosted across his lips, and she gave really good hugs. Papa says I don't remember, but I do. I remember how she smelled. Elena listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty comfort or pitying looks. She just let him talk, let the memories spill out like water from a cracked vessel. Neither of them noticed the shadow in the hallway. Dominic stood just beyond the doorframe, his back pressed against the wall. His face betrayed nothing, but his hands hidden from view were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When Marco finally fell silent, he looked up at Elena with those two old eyes. Can you stay? He asked. For a long time? Elena opened her mouth. No words came out. The first 2 weeks were a crash course in survival of a different kind. Elena had spent 5 years learning how to stretch $20 into a week's worth of groceries. Now she had to learn which fork to use for salad and which spoon was meant for soup. I can't breathe in this thing, she gasped, tugging at the bodice of a midnight blue gown that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent. The stylist, a thin woman named Claudia, who looked at Elena like she was a particularly challenging renovation project, simply pulled the laces tighter. Beauty requires sacrifice, Mrs. Corsetti. Mrs. Corsetti. The name still felt like wearing someone else's skin. There were 47 staff members in the Hamptons estate. Elena memorized each name within the first week. Maria, the head housekeeper who had worked for the family for 30 years. James, the driver who never spoke, but always opened doors exactly 2 seconds before she reached them. Thomas, the chef who made eggs Benedict that tasted like clouds. They all called her ma'am. They all looked at her with carefully blank expressions that hid curiosity, skepticism, or both. The hardest part was learning to be served. I can get my own water, Elena insisted for the dozenth time, reaching for the crystal pitcher. The maid Anna, 19, from Queens just like Elena, looked horrified. Please, Mrs. Corsetti. Mr. Corsetti will be upset if Mr. Corsetti can pour his own water too. Elena filled her glass and took a pointed sip. I have functioning arms. Had them for 28 years now. The charity gala came on day 12. Elena had never worn real diamonds before. The necklace around her throat felt like a beautiful noose, cold, heavy, impossible to ignore. The earrings pulled at her lobes. The bracelet clinked against her wrist every time she moved. The ballroom was filled with women who had never worked a day in their lives. They glittered like Christmas ornaments, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Their eyes even sharper as they assessed the newcomer on Dominic Corsetti's arm. Elena felt their judgment like a physical weight. Waitress, gold digger, opportunist. The words weren't spoken, but they didn't need to be. A woman in red, Valentino stepped backward without looking, her stiletto heel grinding directly onto Elena's foot. The pain was brief but bright. Oh, the woman glanced down, her expression bored. She didn't apologize. Didn't even pretend to. Elena felt Dominic stiffen beside her. Don't bow your head, he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You're Mrs. Corsetti now. Elena looked up at him, then back at the woman in red. I'm not bowing, she said calmly. I'm checking to see whose foot I need to accidentally step on later. Something flickered across Dominic's face. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. It was the first crack she had seen in his marble facade. In the days that followed, Elena began learning the invisible map of power. The Moreno family controlled the docks in New Jersey. They were enemies, always watching. The Russo family was allied with the Corsettis, but alliances in this world were written in sand. Trust no one, suspect everyone. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was Strangely, not entirely unlike working at Joe's diner at 2 a.m. On the 14th night, Elena was walking back from dinner when she felt it. A gaze, heavy, hostile. She turned. A man stood at the end of the corridor, silver hair swept back with precision, gold-rimmed glasses perched on a sharp nose, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, didn't even try. He looked at Elena like she was dirt on his expensive shoes. "Mrs. Corsetti," he said, his tone making the name sound like an insult. Then he walked away without waiting for a response. Elena watched him go, something cold settling in her stomach. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he was dangerous. His name was Tony Benedetto. Elena learned this the next morning from Maria, the head housekeeper, whose lips pressed into a thin line at the mention of him. "Mr. Benedetto has been with the family for 30 years, Maria said carefully, folding towels with mechanical precision. He served the elder Mr. Corsetti, very loyal." The pause before loyal spoke volumes. Elena found herself cornered that same afternoon. She had been walking through the East Wing, still learning the labyrinth of corridors, when Tony stepped out of a doorway directly into her path. Up close, he was even more unsettling. 45 years old, maybe older. Silver hair combed back with military precision, gold-rimmed glasses that magnified pale blue eyes, cold eyes, calculating eyes, and that smile, the one that curved his lips but left the rest of his face untouched, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "Mrs. Corsetti." He pronounced each syllable with exaggerated care. "Taking a stroll through your new kingdom?" Elena straightened her spine. "Just learning my way around." Tony stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "Tell me, what exactly do you think you're doing here?" "I live here. You exist here." His smile sharpened. "There's a difference. You stumble into a diner, catch a few bullets, and suddenly you're wearing the Corsetti name like you earned it." He laughed softly. "Do you know how many women have tried to claw their way into this family? Models, heiresses, daughters of allies worth billions." Elena held his gaze. "And yet here I am. Here you are." Tony tilted his head, studying her like a specimen under glass. A waitress from Queens. No family, no connections, no value whatsoever except for a few scars. "I'm the one Dominic chose." Elena kept her voice steady, even as her heart hammered. "What does that make you?" Something flickered in Tony's eyes, something dark and sharp and quickly hidden. "I am the one who has protected this family for 3 decades. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I was here before you. I'll be here after you're gone. And make no mistake, little waitress, you will be gone." He leaned closer. "This family devours people who don't belong. And you?" His lips curled. "You don't belong." He walked away before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Elena stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms. That evening, she began asking questions. The staff was reluctant to talk about Tony Benedetto. James, the driver, suddenly had urgent business whenever his name came up. The kitchen staff developed selective deafness. But Anna, the young maid from Queens, the one who reminded Elena of herself, whispered fragments when no one else was listening. He had a daughter, Sophia. Anna's eyes darted nervously. Beautiful, educated. Everyone assumed she would marry Mr. Corsetti after his first wife passed. What happened? He chose someone else. Mrs. Isabella, 7 years ago. Anna's voice dropped even lower. Mr. Benedetto never forgave him. His daughter, she left the country, doesn't speak to her father anymore. Elena absorbed this information, adding it to the growing puzzle in her mind. Tony Benedetto, 30 years of loyalty. A daughter rejected, a grudge that had been festering for nearly a decade. Something was very wrong with this picture. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Her shoulder ached despite the medication, and her mind wouldn't stop turning. She wandered down to the kitchen for water, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. And that's when she saw him, Tony Benedetto, slipping through the shadows of the east corridor, moving toward Dominic's private office. It was 2 a.m. He was alone, and he glanced over his shoulder 3 times before disappearing through the office door. Elena couldn't stop thinking about Tony and that locked office door, but she had learned long ago that answers didn't come from rushing. They came from watching, waiting, pretending not to notice while noticing everything. So she watched. And while she watched, she spent her afternoons with Marco. The garden behind the estate was massive. Manicured hedges, rose bushes, a fountain that sparkled in the autumn sunlight. It was also, Elena suspected, the only place Marco was allowed to be a child. "Okay," she said, standing in the middle of the lawn. The game is called statues. When I yell freeze, you have to stop moving completely. Like a statue. Whoever moves first loses. Marco clutched his teddy bear, skeptical. That's it? That's it. Ready? She spun around, counting to 3. Freeze! She whipped back. Marco stood absolutely motionless. Not a twitch, not a blink. His small body was perfectly still. His breathing so controlled she couldn't even see his chest rise. Elena's heart clenched. 7 years old, and he had already mastered the art of becoming invisible, of making himself small and silent and easy to overlook. This wasn't a game to him. It was survival. The same way she had learned to read her father's moods, to sense when Marcus was about to snap, Marco had learned to disappear. You're really good at this, she said softly. Marco relaxed, something like pride flickering across his face. Papa says being still keeps you safe. Of course he did. Your turn to teach me something, Elena said, forcing lightness into her voice. Marco's eyes lit up. Chess? He was terrifyingly good. Within 20 minutes, Elena had lost 3 games. Marco moved his pieces with casual precision, always 5 steps ahead, always knowing exactly where she would go before she went there. Papa taught me, Marco explained, capturing her queen without even looking smug. He says chess is like life. You have to think 10 moves ahead, or someone else will think them for you. Elena stared at the decimated board. Your papa is very smart. He's the smartest. Marco reset the pieces. Again? That night, Elena woke to crying. It was soft, muffled, like someone trying desperately not to be heard, but her room was close to Marco's, and 5 years of light sleeping had made her attuned to sounds of distress. She was out of bed before she fully woke up. Marco's door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and found him curled in the center of his enormous bed, teddy bear crushed against his chest, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Hey. Elena crossed the room and sat on the edge of the mattress. Hey, sweetheart. Bad dream? Marco nodded, unable to speak. Come here. She gathered him into her arms, careful of her still healing shoulder, and held him the way she used to hold Lily during thunderstorms, the way their mother had held them both before illness stole her strength. And then, without thinking, Elena began to sing. It was an old lullaby, nothing fancy. Her mother had hummed it during the worst nights, when the bill collectors called and the cupboards were empty and hope felt like a foreign language. Hush now, my darling. The stars are all sleeping. Close your eyes, little one. I'll keep you safe while you're dreaming. Marco's sobs quieted. His breathing slowed. His small body grew heavy against her chest. Elena kept singing, her voice barely above a whisper, until she was certain he was asleep. Then she looked up. Dominic stood in the doorway. She didn't know how long he had been there. His face was carved from stone, utterly unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, endless eyes, held something she hadn't seen before. Something cracked, something human. Neither of them spoke. Elena held his gaze across the darkness of his son's bedroom, the sleeping child warm in her arms, and for one suspended moment, the contract between them felt like something else entirely. Sleep refused to come. Elena lay in her silk-sheeted bed, staring at the painted angels on the ceiling, her shoulder throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. The medication had worn off hours ago, but she didn't want to ring for more, didn't want to admit weakness to the silent staff who watched her every move. At 2 a.m, she gave up. The estate was different at night. Quieter, the marble corridors stretched like empty veins, lit only by occasional wall sconces that cast pools of amber light. Elena wandered without destination, her bare feet silent on cold stone. The library found her. It was enormous. 2 stories of leather-bound books, rolling ladders, a fireplace large enough to stand in. The kind of room that existed in movies about old money and older secrets. She wasn't alone. Dominic stood by the window, his back to the door, a crystal glass of whiskey catching the moonlight. He had shed his jacket and tie. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with faded scars. He looked almost human. Elena froze in the doorway, uncertain whether to retreat. Can't sleep? His voice was low, rough. He didn't turn around. My shoulder, she admitted. You? Men like me don't sleep. He took a slow sip of whiskey. We wait. Wait for what? Now he turned. The firelight carved shadows across his face, deepening the scar along his jaw, hollowing his cheeks. The next knife in the back. The words hung between them, heavy with exhaustion. Elena should have left, should have retreated to her gilded cage and maintained the careful distance the contract demanded. Instead, she walked into the room. That sounds lonely. Dominic's lips twisted, not quite a smile. Loneliness is a luxury. It implies you once had company to lose. Elena settled into one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. Her shoulder screamed at the movement, but she ignored it. You had Isabella. The name landed like a stone in still water. Dominic's hand tightened around his glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he moved to the chair across from her. Isabella was light. His voice was barely above a whisper. In a world of darkness, she was the only thing that made sense. She laughed at my jokes, terrible jokes. She made me believe I could be something other than what my father raised me to be. He stared into the amber liquid. She died in my arms, hemorrhaging after the birth. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. His jaw clenched. I had money, power, an empire at my command, and I couldn't buy 5 minutes to say goodbye. Elena's chest ached. But you saved Marco. Marco. Dominic's eyes flickered to hers. Marco is everything. The only good thing I've ever done. The only reason I haven't. He stopped himself. Swallowed. He's why I keep going. You save him every day, Elena said quietly. Every day he wakes up safe in this house. That's because of you. Every nightmare you chase away, every meal you share, every chess game you play, that's love. That's more than a lot of fathers ever give. Dominic stared at her. It was different from before. Not the calculating assessment of a businessman evaluating an asset. Not the cold scrutiny of a mafia boss measuring a threat. This was something raw, something searching. You sang to him tonight. The words came out hoarse. I heard you. I stood outside his door and listened to you sing my son to sleep. And I. He didn't finish. Slowly, he reached across the space between them. His hand large, scarred, capable of violence she couldn't imagine, touched her shoulder. Gentle. So impossibly gentle. Does it still hurt? Elena's breath caught. Not anymore. His fingers lingered on the fabric of her robe, just above the bandage. His eyes held hers, dark as midnight, deep as grief. The distance between them shrank. Elena could feel the heat of him, smell the whiskey and sandalwood, see the pulse jumping in his throat. His hand slid from her shoulder to her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. Neither of them moved, neither of them breathed, and then his phone rang. The sound shattered the moment like glass. Dominic jerked back, pulling the device from his pocket, his expression shifting from open to guarded in the space of a heartbeat. What? Elena watched his face drain of color. When? His voice went flat. Dangerous. How many? Are you certain it was? He listened for another moment, then ended the call without another word. When he looked at Elena, the man from moments ago was gone. In his place stood the Mafia boss. The predator. What is it? Elena asked, fear coiling in her stomach. Dominic's jaw tightened. We have a problem. 1 week passed. The phone call that night had been about a shipment warehouse fire, inventory lost, suspected arson. Dominic had disappeared for 3 days to handle the crisis, leaving Elena alone in the estate with Marco, the staff, and her growing suspicions. She couldn't stop thinking about Tony Benedetto, the way he moved through the house like he owned it, the cold hatred in his eyes whenever he looked at her, the night she had seen him slipping into Dominic's office at 2 a.m. Something was wrong. Elena could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had warned her about Marcus's temper, about her father's gambling, about every danger she had survived. She couldn't trust anyone enough to ask for help. The staff feared Tony. Dominic had known him for 30 years. Who would believe a waitress from Queens over the family's most loyal advisor? So Elena decided to find proof herself. She watched Tony for days, learned his patterns. He took calls in the garden at precisely 10 each morning. He lunched alone in his private quarters, and every evening at 6, he retreated to his office in the East Wing for exactly 2 hours. On the 7th day, Elena made her move. She waited until Tony left for his evening meeting with the accountants. Then she slipped through the corridor, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the guards could hear it. The office door was locked, but Elena had spent 5 years working alongside janitors, maintenance men, people who knew how buildings really worked. A hairpin and 30 seconds of fumbling later, the lock clicked open. The room was sparse. Desk, filing cabinet, a portrait of the elder Corsetti on the wall. Nothing obviously incriminating. Elena searched methodically. Drawers, papers, the space beneath the carpet, nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed the slight gap behind the bottom desk drawer. Too small for files. Perfect for hiding something you didn't want found. Her fingers found it. A phone. Small, cheap. The kind you bought with cash and threw away after a single use. A burner phone. Elena's hands trembled as she powered it on. The call history showed only one number. Area code she didn't recognize, not New York, not New Jersey. Somewhere far away, somewhere untraceable. She opened the messages. Most were encrypted. Strings of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her. But one word appeared again and again, scattered through the chaos like a bloody fingerprint. Marco. Elena's blood turned to ice. She photographed everything. The phone, the messages, the call history. Her hands shook so badly the first 3 pictures came out blurred. When she finished, she replaced the phone exactly as she had found it and slipped out of the office. Her first instinct was to run to Dominic, to show him everything, to expose Tony for what he was. But she stopped in the corridor, forcing herself to think. If she accused Tony without irrefutable proof, he would deny it, and then he would know she was a threat. Whatever he was planning, he would accelerate, or he would eliminate her first. But if she stayed silent, if she waited too long. Marco's face flashed through her mind. His shy smile, his old teddy bear, the way he had asked if she could stay for a long time. I need more evidence, she told herself. Something Dominic can't dismiss, something that will end this permanently. She would watch Tony more closely, follow the money, find the connection to the Morenos. She just needed a little more time. Time she didn't have. The alarm shattered the silence like a gunshot. Red lights strobed through the corridor. Voices shouted. Footsteps thundered. Elena ran toward the noise, her heart in her throat. A guard sprinted past her, face white with terror. Marco! He was screaming into his radio. The boy is gone. Marco has disappeared. The estate erupted into chaos. Every light blazed. Guards sprinted through corridors, shouting into radios. The alarm screamed its endless warning, red strobes painting the marble walls in the color of blood. Elena ran toward Marco's room, pushing past staff members frozen in shock. The door hung open. The bed was empty. The sheets were tangled, thrown aside in haste. And on the pillow, abandoned like a broken promise, lay Marco's teddy bear. Elena's knees nearly buckled. Where is he? The roar came from behind her. She spun. Dominic stood in the doorway, and for the first time, Elena understood why men feared him. He wasn't the businessman anymore, not the grieving widower or the distant father. He was something else entirely, something ancient and terrible, a predator stripped of civilization. His eyes burned like hellfire. His jaw was locked tight enough to shatter teeth. Every line of his body radiated violence barely contained. Who was guarding my son? A guard stumbled forward, face ashen. Sir, the cameras went dark 15 minutes ago. Entire east wing. By the time we realized the back entrance, another guard interrupted, his voice shaking, unlocked from the inside. Someone had the codes. And the men stationed there? Silence. Where are they? We found them, sir. The guard swallowed hard. In the garden shed. Both dead. Throats cut. Elena watched the information hit Dominic like physical blows. The cameras, the codes, the murdered guards. This wasn't a random attack. This was betrayal from within, and she knew exactly who. Tony. Her voice cut through the chaos. Every head turned. Dominic's burning gaze fixed on her. What? It's Tony. Elena pulled out her phone, hands steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. I found this in his office. A burner phone, calls to an unknown number, encrypted messages, and one word that keeps appearing over and over. She held up the photographs. Marco. Dominic stared at the screen. His face went utterly blank, the calm before a hurricane. Tony has worked for my family for 30 years. 30 years is long enough to build trust. Elena met his eyes without flinching, and long enough to build a betrayal. For one heartbeat, Dominic didn't move. Then he turned to his men. Find Benedetto. Now. They found Tony at the north gate, trying to slip through a service entrance with a bag of cash and a set of false documents. He didn't even make it to the fence before 4 guards dragged him to his knees. Dominic stood over him in the main hall, surrounded by armed men. Elena watched from the doorway, her nails digging into her palms. Tony's silver hair was disheveled. His gold-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his nose, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, still held defiance. Where is my son? Dominic's voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. Tony laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your son, your precious heir. Do you know how long I've waited for this, Dominic? 30 years serving your father. 30 years cleaning up your family's messes. And what did I get? Nothing. My daughter wasn't good enough for you. Isabella was good enough, but not Sophia. I'm not going to ask again. The Moranos offered me 30% of the territory. Tony's lips curled. 30%. More than your father ever gave me. More than you ever offered. It's just business, Dominic. Nothing personal. Dominic didn't respond. He simply stared at Tony with those hellfire eyes, and Elena watched the defiance slowly drain from the older man's face. The old warehouse, Tony whispered, fear finally cracking his voice. Brooklyn, by the waterfront. But you can't go alone. The Moranos have 20 men there, maybe more. You'll never, I'm going with you. Elena stepped forward. Every eye in the room turned to her. Dominic's jaw tightened. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. I took 3 bullets for Marco. Elena held his gaze, unflinching. I'm not staying behind while he's out there scared and alone. Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. We need more men, he said finally. More than I have here. Then we get them. There's only one person who can provide that kind of firepower on short notice. Dominic's expression hardened, and he won't be happy to see me. 20 minutes later, Elena sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV, watching the estate disappear behind them. Where are we going? She asked. Dominic's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The Bronx. There's an underground fighting ring in an abandoned warehouse. It's run by someone who has every reason to hate me. His jaw clenched. My brother, Vincent. The warehouse loomed out of the South Bronx night like a rotting tooth. Elena recognized the neighborhood. 3 blocks from her old apartment. 5 blocks from the corner where she used to wait for the bus at 4 a.m. She had survived these streets for years, but she had never known this place existed. From outside, it looked abandoned. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, a chain-link fence sagging with neglect. But the bass thumping through the concrete told a different story. Dominic led her through a side entrance, past 2 enormous men who took one look at him and stepped aside without a word. Down a corridor, through a steel door, and into hell. The space opened up into a massive arena. Hundreds of people packed the concrete floor, screaming, waving cash, their faces twisted with bloodlust. The air was thick with sweat, cigarette smoke, and something metallic, the unmistakable scent of blood. In the center stood a steel cage. Inside, 2 men fought. Not boxed, not sparred, fought. One had blood streaming from a gash above his eye. The other's knuckles were raw, splitting with each punch. They moved like animals, all instinct and violence. Heavy metal music thundered from speakers mounted in the rafters, barely audible over the roaring crowd. Elena had seen poverty. She had seen desperation. But this was something else entirely. This was a place where men came to destroy and be destroyed. There. Dominic nodded toward a raised platform at the far end of the warehouse. A throne sat on the platform. Not a real throne, it was welded together from car parts, steering wheels, exhaust pipes, a crumpled hood ornament crowning the top like a twisted halo, and on that throne sat Vincent Corsetti. He was Dominic's mirror, but shattered and reassembled wrong. The same dark hair, but longer, wilder, falling past his shoulders. The same strong jaw, but shadowed with days of stubble. The same tall frame, but lean where Dominic was broad. Tattoos covered every visible inch of skin below his neck. His shirt hung open, revealing a chest marked by a scar that ran from collarbone to navel pale and raised, like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. He was 33 years old and looked like he had lived 100 violent lives. Vincent spotted them approaching. His lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. Well. His voice carried over the noise, sharp as broken glass. The prince descends to the sewers. Did you get lost, brother? Or did you finally run out of friends upstairs? Dominic stopped at the base of the platform. His face was carved from stone. I need your help, Vincent. Vincent laughed. A harsh, barking sound that made several nearby fighters flinch. You need my help. He rose from his throne, spreading his tattooed arms wide. You who exiled me from the family. You who told father I was too wild, too reckless, too dangerous for the precious Corsetti legacy. He descended the platform steps slowly, deliberately, circling Dominic like a predator sizing up prey. Give me one reason I shouldn't let the Moranos peel your skin off and mail it to your board of directors. They have Marco. Vincent stopped circling. The smile vanished from his face like smoke in the wind. What? The Moranos took my son. Tony Benedetto betrayed us. They're holding Marco in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and I don't have enough men to get him back. Vincent's jaw tightened. His eyes, the same dark eyes as Dominic, but wilder, angrier, flickered with something that might have been pain. Marco, he repeated softly. Elena stepped forward. Every eye in the immediate vicinity turned to her. She was suddenly aware of how she must look, a woman in a blood-stained dress, a gun tucked into her waistband, her hair tangled and her face pale with exhaustion. "You can hate your brother," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "That's your right, but Marco is 7 years old. He's never hurt anyone. He sleeps with a teddy bear and has nightmares about monsters." Her voice cracked slightly. "Right now, real monsters have him, and he's alone and terrified." Vincent stared at her. "Who the hell are you?" "My wife," Dominic said. "Contract wife," Elena corrected. "But the boy is real. The danger is real. And every second we waste here is a second Marco spends wondering if anyone is coming to save him." Vincent's gaze moved between Elena and Dominic, between the gun at her hip and the fire in her eyes. "The waitress," he murmured. "I heard rumors. Jumped in front of bullets for the kid." His lips twitched. "You've got teeth. I'll give you that." He turned away, facing the crowd below. For a long moment, he said nothing. The fighters in the cage continued their brutal dance. The crowd continued screaming for blood. Then Vincent raised his hand. The music cut out. The crowd fell silent. Even the fighters stopped, turning to look at their king. "Blood rule," Vincent said, his voice echoing through the sudden quiet. "We hate each other. We fight each other. We curse each other's names. But blood doesn't betray blood. My nephew is in enemy hands." He turned to the assembled fighters, men with broken noses, cauliflower ears, scars mapping every inch of their bodies. "The fight is over. Pack your gear." His voice rose to a roar. "We're going hunting." The response was immediate. Men scrambled for weapons, for keys, for vehicles. Within minutes, the warehouse had transformed from an arena of entertainment into a staging ground for war. Vincent turned back to Dominic. "You owe me for this." "I know, and I'm still going to punch you later." Despite everything, Dominic's lips twitched. "I'd expect nothing less." 15 minutes later, a convoy of battered trucks and motorcycles roared out of the South Bronx. Destination, Brooklyn. The warehouse emerged from the pre-dawn fog like a ghost ship. Gray light was just beginning to bleed across the horizon, but the mist rolling off the East River swallowed most of it. The building squatted at the end of a crumbling pier, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and the skeletons of long-dead machinery. Through the binoculars, Elena counted the guards. 18, maybe 20. All armed, all positioned with the careful precision of men expecting trouble. "Front gate has 6, Vincent muttered, crouched beside her behind a stack of rotting pallets. 4 on the roof. The rest are patrolling the perimeter in pairs." Dominic's jaw was locked tight. "Marco will be inside. Probably the back storage area. It's the most defensible position. So we hit them hard and fast." Vincent's eyes gleamed with something that looked disturbingly like excitement. "My boys take the front. Draw their fire. You two slip in through the loading dock on the east side." Elena gripped the gun Dominic had given her. It felt heavier than it should. "Can you use that?" Vincent asked, nodding at the weapon. "I've never shot anyone before. First time for everything." He grinned a wild, reckless expression that belonged on a madman. "Just point at the bad guys and squeeze. The gun does the rest." Dominic touched her arm. Brief, grounding. "Stay behind me. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. If something happens, nothing's going to happen." Elena met his eyes. "We're getting Marco back." For a moment, something flickered in those dark depths, something that might have been fear, or hope. Then Vincent whistled sharply, and all hell broke loose. The lead truck, a reinforced pickup driven by a man with a face like cracked leather, accelerated straight toward the front gate. The engine roared. The guards shouted. Gunfire erupted. The truck smashed through the chain-link fence like it was made of paper. Vincent's fighters poured out before the vehicle even stopped moving. They came with bats and chains and shotguns, screaming like demons released from hell. The Moreno guards scrambled to respond, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the assault. Vincent led the charge, laughing, actually laughing, as he drove his fist into a guard's face. He moved like violence personified, ducking bullets, breaking bones, painting the concrete with blood. "Now," Dominic hissed. They ran. The east side of the warehouse was chaos. Guards sprinted toward the front, drawn by the sounds of battle. Dominic moved through the shadows like smoke, his footsteps silent, his gun raised. A guard appeared around a corner. Dominic fired once. The man dropped. Another guard. Another shot. Another body. Elena followed, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she could taste copper. But her hands were steady. 5 years of survival had trained her to function through terror. They reached the loading dock. Dominic shot the lock off the door. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and shadows. The sounds of battle echoed from the front. Shouts, gunfire, the crash of breaking glass. But here, deeper in the building, an eerie quiet descended. They moved through the labyrinth, stepping over bodies that Vincent's distraction had already claimed. The air smelled of gunpowder and rust and something else, something that made Elena's stomach clench. Fear. The place reeked of fear. There, Dominic breathed. A door at the back of the warehouse. Heavy steel. A single light glowing above it. And from behind it, barely audible over the distant chaos, came a sound that shattered Elena's heart. A child crying. Soft, muffled sobs. The sound of a 7-year-old trying desperately to be brave and failing. Marco. Dominic's composure cracked. For one raw second, Elena saw the father beneath the Mafia boss, the man who had lost his wife, who had devoted his life to protecting his son, who was now listening to that son weep in the hands of his enemies. Then the mask slammed back into place. He approached the door, tested the handle, locked. On 3, he whispered. Elena raised her gun. Her hands didn't shake. 1, 2, 3. Dominic kicked the door with enough force to tear it from its hinges. The room beyond was small. Concrete walls, a single hanging bulb casting harsh shadows, and in the center, Tony Benedetto stood waiting. His silver hair was disheveled, his gold-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his nose. Sweat glistened on his forehead, but it was his arm that froze Elena's blood. It was wrapped around Marco's throat. The little boy's feet dangled off the ground. Tears streamed down his face, soaking into the fabric of his torn pajamas. His teddy bear lay discarded on the floor, and pressed against Marco's temple was the barrel of a gun. "Stay back!" Tony's voice cracked with desperation. The gun trembled against Marco's temple. The little boy's eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. His lips moved in soundless prayer. "Put down your weapon, Dominic. Now, or I paint the wall with your air." Dominic raised his hands slowly. His gun clattered to the concrete floor. "Let him go, Tony." His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "This is between us. Marco has nothing to do with your grudges." "Nothing to do with it?" Tony laughed a high, unhinged sound. "He has everything to do with it. He's the future of the Corsetti Empire, the precious bloodline, the son you would die for." He pressed the barrel harder against Marco's skull. The boy whimpered. 30 years, Dominic. 30 years I gave to your family. I cleaned up your father's messes. I buried bodies. I lied to federal investigators. I did everything to prove my loyalty." Tony's face twisted with decades of festering rage. "And what did I get? Your father promised Sophia would marry the heir, promised our families would be united. Then you chose that outsider, that nobody, Isabella." He spat the name like poison. "My daughter wasn't good enough for the great Dominic Corsetti, so she left. Couldn't stand to live in the same city as her humiliation." "Tony, you think you're a king?" Tony's voice rose to a shriek. "You're nothing. A scared little boy your father forced onto the throne because there was no one else. You don't deserve this empire. You don't deserve anything." Elena stood frozen in the doorway. Tony hadn't looked at her once. His entire world had narrowed to Dominic, to the object of 30 years of hatred. She was invisible, irrelevant, a waitress who didn't matter. His mistake. Elena's eyes found Marco. The boy's gaze flickered to her through his tears. Even in his terror, even with death pressed against his skull, he saw her. Elena slowly raised her finger to her lips. Marco's eyes widened slightly. Recognition dawned through the fear. She mouthed 2 words, praying he would understand. "Fall down." The statue's game. The game they had played in the garden. The game where Marco had learned to go perfectly, completely still. Marco blinked once, twice. He understood. "Marco, now." Elena's scream shattered the tension like a hammer through glass. Marco went boneless. Every muscle in his small body released at once. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his weight suddenly dragging downward, pulling against Tony's grip. Tony stumbled. His arm jerked. The gun wavered away from Marco's head as he struggled to hold the collapsing child. 1 second. That's all Elena had. She didn't aim for Tony's head. She wasn't a marksman. She wasn't a soldier. She was a waitress who had learned to shoot 6 hours ago. She aimed for the largest target she could see. Bang! The bullet caught Tony in the shoulder. Blood sprayed. He screamed a raw, animal sound of shock and pain, and his arms flew open. Marco hit the ground. "Run!" Dominic roared. "Marco, run!" The boy scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the door. Toward Elena. She caught him, scooped him up, spun him out of the room and pressed his face against her chest. "Don't look," she whispered fiercely. Don't look, baby. I've got you. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Dominic approached Tony, who had crumpled against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The older man looked up, his gold-rimmed glasses cracked, his face twisted with pain and hatred. You'll never be safe, Tony hissed. The Morenos will send more. They'll never stop. You can't protect him forever. Dominic raised his gun. Bang, chest, bang, head. Tony Benedetto slumped against the concrete, his silver hair staining red, 30 years of ambition and resentment pooling beneath him. Silence fell. Elena stood in the doorway, Marco trembling in her arms, unable to look away. Dominic stared at the body for a long moment. His hand shook, the first sign of weakness she had ever seen from him. Then he turned. The monster was gone. The Mafia boss was gone. There was only a father, hollow-eyed and desperate, crossing the room in 3 strides. He fell to his knees before them, his arms wrapped around both of them, Elena and Marco crushing them against his chest with the strength of a man who had nearly lost everything. I've got you. His voice broke, shattered, became something raw and human and devastated. I've got you both. Oh God, I've got you both. Marco sobbed into his father's chest. Elena felt tears streaming down her own face, mixing with the gunpowder residue on her skin. They stayed like that for an eternity. A broken family, kneeling in blood and concrete, holding each other like the world was ending. Finally, Marco lifted his tear-stained face. He looked at his father, then at Elena. Papa, he whispered, his small voice hoarse from crying. Yes, Piccolo? Marco's fingers tightened on Elena's sleeve. I want Elena to stay. Forever. The sun rose over Brooklyn like a wound splitting open. Golden light spilled across the warehouse district, painting the carnage in shades of amber and rust. Bodies lay scattered across the concrete Moreno soldiers who had chosen the wrong side of history. The fog from the East River was burning away, revealing the full scope of the night's violence. Sirens wailed in the distance, but Elena knew they wouldn't come here. Dominic had made a single phone call, spoken 3 sentences, and hung up. The police would be redirected. The bodies would be handled. By noon, this warehouse would be nothing but another abandoned building in a city full of them. That was the power of the Corsetti name. Vincent stood near the gate, a cigarette dangling from his lips, watching Dominic and Elena emerge from the warehouse. Marco was cradled in his father's arms, finally asleep, exhaustion having claimed him somewhere between the storage room and the exit. Well. Vincent exhaled a stream of smoke. His knuckles were split and bloody, his shirt torn, but his eyes held something that looked almost like respect. The waitress has fangs, after all. Elena didn't have the energy to respond. She simply stood there, covered in dust and dried blood, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her shoulders. Vincent flicked ash onto the ground. You owe me, brother. Dominic shifted Marco's weight, his jaw tight. I know, big time. I'm talking holiday dinners, box seats at Yankees games, maybe a yacht. Come home, Vincent. The words hung in the morning air. Vincent's smirk faded. His cigarette paused halfway to his lips. Home? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You exiled me, remember? Told father I was too dangerous for the family business. Too unstable. Too wild. I exiled the brother who was destroying himself. Dominic's voice was quiet, heavy. The man standing in front of me tonight, the one who came when I called, who fought for his nephew, who led his people into battle without hesitation, that's not the same person. Vincent said nothing. His jaw worked silently. Something changed. Dominic continued. I don't know what. I don't know when. But you're different now. Vincent's gaze slid to Elena. Her doing? Ours. Dominic looked at his brother. We all need to change. I've spent 7 years building walls, keeping everyone out, telling myself it was for protection. His arms tightened around Marco. Tonight proved that walls aren't enough. I need family. Real family. The brothers stared at each other across years of resentment and silence. Finally, Vincent dropped his cigarette and crushed it beneath his boot. Fine. He pointed a bloodied finger at Dominic. But I'm still going to punch you. Frequently. And I'm not wearing suits to your fancy dinners. Something flickered across Dominic's face. Not quite a smile, but close. I'll see you at home, little brother. The drive back to the Hamptons was quiet. Marco slept in Elena's lap, his small fingers curled around the hem of her ruined dress. His teddy bear retrieved from the warehouse floor was tucked against his chest. Dominic drove with one hand on the wheel. The other rested on Elena's hand. She didn't pull away. Outside, the city gave way to suburbs. Suburbs gave way to coastline. And Elena watched the world blur past the window, She had thrown herself in front of bullets for a stranger's child and woken up in a nightmare. But somewhere along the way, between the gilded cage and the gunfire, between the lullabies in the library at midnight, the nightmare had started to feel like something else. Something that might, impossibly, be called home. Elena. She turned her head. Dominic's eyes stayed on the road, but his thumb traced slow circles on her knuckles. Thank you. For shooting Tony? A pause. A breath. For everything. 6 months later, spring arrived at the Corsetti estate, like a promise finally kept. The gardens exploded with color roses climbing the stone walls, tulips nodding in the breeze, and lilies blooming in every corner. The air smelled of fresh grass and salt from the distant ocean, carrying warmth that had been absent for too long. Elena sat on the stone bench near the fountain, watching the scene before her with a smile she couldn't quite suppress. Marco was teaching 3 enormous bodyguards how to play hopscotch. The men, each one capable of killing with their bare hands, hopped awkwardly on one foot, their faces screwed up in concentration, while a 7-year-old critiqued their form with devastating seriousness. No, no, no! You can't step on the lines, Bruno. That's the whole point. Vincent leaned against a nearby column, arms crossed, watching his men be humiliated by a child. He had taken over security 3 months ago, claiming the Hamptons needed someone with actual instincts. The truth, Elena suspected, was that he simply wanted to be close to family again. He still punched Dominic at least once a week, usually during Sunday dinners. Elena looked down at her hands. 2 rings now, the massive diamond that had appeared on her finger that first terrifying morning, and beside it, a new band platinum, elegant, engraved on the inside with words she hadn't shown anyone. My light, my home. Dominic had given it to her a month ago. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a quiet evening in the library, a velvet box, and eyes that said everything his words couldn't. Her shoulder was bare beneath the straps of her sundress. The scar from the bullet was visible, a puckered starburst of healed tissue that she no longer tried to hide. It was part of her story now, part of who she had become. Her mother was in remission. The doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering called it a miracle. Margaret Mercer now lived with Lily in a sunny apartment in Manhattan, close enough to visit every weekend. Lily had made the dean's list last semester. Everything Elena had sacrificed for every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every penny counted and recounted had finally paid off, just not in the way she had ever imagined. Thinking about running away? The voice came from behind her, deep, familiar, no longer frightening. Elena turned. Dominic walked toward her across the manicured lawn. He wasn't wearing a suit today, just a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, collar open, hair slightly tousled by the spring breeze. He looked younger, lighter, like some weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Tried that once, Elena replied. Ended up in a shootout in Brooklyn. Didn't go well. Dominic's lips twitched as he sat beside her on the bench. What are you thinking about? Elena watched Marco demonstrate proper hopping technique to a 200-pound former Marine. I used to hate the smell of lilies, she said softly. They reminded me of funerals, of loss, of things I couldn't afford. She breathed deep. Now they smell like home. Dominic was quiet for a moment. The contract expires in 6 months. Elena's heart stuttered. Technically, he continued, his voice carefully neutral. You've fulfilled every obligation. You can take the money, walk away, return to your old life with no guards, no guns, no. He paused. No obligations. Elena turned to face him. I want to renegotiate. Something flickered in those dark eyes. You want more money? I want to eliminate the termination clause. Dominic went still. Permanent contract, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the thunder of her pulse. No exit clause, no expiration date. Elena. His voice was rough, broken. You know what I am, what this life is, the danger, the violence, the I know exactly what you are. She reached out and grabbed his collar, pulling him closer until their faces were inches apart. I took 3 bullets for this family. I killed a man for this family. I sang lullabies and played hopscotch and learned which fork to use for salad. Her eyes burned into his. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with this family. With your son. With you. Dominic's breath caught. I'm not asking for permission, Dominic. I'm telling you what I want. Her grip tightened on his collar. I want to stay. Forever. And you don't get to decide if I'm worthy of that choice. I do. For 1 heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his hands came up to cup her face, gentle, reverent, trembling slightly, and he kissed her. It wasn't like the almost kiss in the library, interrupted by ringing phones and chaos. This was real. Deep. A kiss that tasted like promises and forever and the first day of a new life. Elena melted into him, her fingers releasing his collar to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. Closer. Never close enough. Papa and Elena are kissing. Marco's delighted shriek echoed across the garden. They broke apart, actually laughing as the little boy sprinted toward them, his teddy bear bouncing against his chest. Finally, Vincent's voice boomed from the column. I thought I was going to have to wait until Christmas. You two are exhausting. Marco launched himself onto the bench between them, wrapping one arm around Elena's waist and one around his father's. Does this mean Elena is staying forever? Dominic looked at Elena over his son's head. His eyes held everything: love, fear, hope, gratitude. Yes, Piccolo, he said softly. Forever. Marco cheered. Vincent slow-clapped sarcastically. The bodyguards abandoned hopscotch to offer awkward congratulations, and Elena sat in the center of it all, surrounded by warmth and chaos and a family she had never expected to find. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the estate in shades of gold and rose. Shadows stretched across the gardens like reaching hands, but for once, they held no threat. The world outside was still dangerous. There would always be enemies. There would always be wolves at the gate. But inside these walls, the lion and his queen had found their home. From a waitress counting tip money in a late-night diner to the queen of New York's underworld, Elena Mercer hadn't just survived the Mafia, she had conquered its king. And so, dear viewers, our story comes to a close. But before we part, let us reflect on the beautiful lessons woven through Elena's journey. This story reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act despite being terrified. Elena didn't consider herself brave. She was simply a woman who refused to let a child suffer when she had the power to help. It teaches us that our darkest moments often lead to our greatest transformations. Elena's life of struggle and sacrifice prepared her for challenges she never imagined facing and gave her the strength to overcome them. Most importantly, it shows us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. That family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who stay, who fight, who choose us when they don't have to. We all carry scars from our past, but like Elena, we can choose whether those scars define us or simply remind us of how far we've come. So we ask you today, what would you do if kindness led you into the unknown? Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you possessed? We would love to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings in the comments below. Tell us how this story touched your heart. Tell us about the moments in your own life when love surprised you, when courage found you, when home turned out to be somewhere you never expected. Your stories matter to us. Every comment, every shared experience, they remind us why we tell these tales. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that even in darkness, light can find a way. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories of love, hope, and the extraordinary journeys of ordinary people. Thank you for joining us on Elena's journey today. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you find your own unexpected family, your own surprising courage, your own place that feels like home. Goodbye for now, dear friends. We will see you in the next video.